mind, every year, one of the great traditions in the Texas House is we have our state Christmas tree. And every member is given a glass, I should have brought it in here, is given a glass ornament, just a glass ball. And some members choose really not to do anything with it. You're not required to. But what you're encouraged to do is to have someone, an artist or students or what have you, decorate it, with a theme and whatnot. And so what I have been doing since I've been elected is I always pick a school district in our 6 counties, and I allow them to decorate the Christmas ornament. And so this year, I hadn't been up to Leon County as far as having them do this in about 5 years. And so I went to Normandy and asked them to do it. And I really wish I'd have brought it in here because it is just gorgeous what they were able to do with this Christmas ornament. And it's representative of our house district. It's a good old East Texas ornament with some pine tree in there. But what I'll do with that is I will take that to Austin. Actually, it's going tonight. My staff's meeting me in Crockett a little bit later, and they're going to drive it over to Austin. And then we're going to hang it on our Capitol Christmas tree. And so that's really a neat thing to get to do every year. And so I was scheduled to go over there and pick that up this morning. And while I was there, the FFA teacher said, "Oh, well, I've got a couple of groups that would like to showcase their presentation that they're doing for their competition." And so I got delayed a little bit getting out of there because I certainly didn't want to say no to a group of students. And so anyway, I apologize, I'm not quite as timely as I wanted to be. But thank you for the invitation to be with you guys today. Hopefully all of you were pleased with this past session. I know having spoken to you're now my 4th retired teacher group here in the district, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. And just to recap briefly, let me back up. Last session, the 85th session, so 2 years ago, there were some things that were done in terms of primarily thinking TRS care that were very tough on our retired teachers. We went up for the first time, I believe it was 12 years, we had to go up on premiums. And so that was very costly. And I heard from a lot of you, I heard from a lot of your colleagues, but more importantly, well, I shouldn't say more importantly, but as importantly, my colleagues that may not be quite as pro-public education and pro-retired teacher as I am, they heard from their active and retired teachers. And so this past session, January, earlier this year, the 86th session, we had a very good session for both active and retired teachers. And I'm going to talk about both of them briefly, but on the retired teacher front, one of the things a lot of people don't know is that there is a state law, or a statute as we call it, that says that we the legislature, cannot offer retirees a 13th check or a cost of living adjustment unless and until the TRS pension fund is actuarially sound. Now, I'm not an accountant, but I married one. And so Nikki has explained to me what exactly that means. It essentially just means you've got to project out for a long time that pension fund is fiscally healthy and it's sound and it's going to be there. And if y'all recall, I believe it was summer, the TRS board voted to lower the rate of assumption, think return on your investments that you have, that the TRS pension fund invests in. And so when you lower the expected return, that means that fund, our big TRS pension fund, is not as solvent or sound as it was before they made that decision. And so the first thing we had to do this past session is come in and make that actuarially sound. And to give you an idea of what that cost the state of Texas, that was about $1.2 billion is what it cost us to make that your TRS pension fund actuarially sound. So that was the first item on the checklist, was we had to do that because a lot of us, including certainly me, wanted to offer our retirees a 13th check, something that we haven't done since I believe it was 2006. And so that was a priority for a lot of legislators because we've been hearing a lot about that since I've been in office and since they've been in office. And so the next thing that we were able to do is to provide a 13th check. And I'll never forget, I was talking to a group of retirees the day that check was deposited in your bank accounts. And so it was a great day to be talking to a retired teacher because everybody was very happy. So we were able to do the 13th check, which was, long overdue, but it does cost our budget. And that cost us about, I believe it was around $680 million to give all retirees across the state of Texas a 13th check. The other thing that we were able to do this session that really hasn't got a lot of fanfare is the TRS Care health insurance program that I'm sure many of you participate in. That was running, again, a deficit, even with the increased premiums that you all had put in, that the state had put in, and that school district had put in as a requirement last session. And that was around $300 and something million. And so the other thing that we were able to do, fortunately, because we had a healthy budget forecast, is we were able to come in and write a check from the state of Texas and pick up the entire liability, unfunded liability for TRS Care, your health insurance program. So when you add all that up, it accounts for about $2 billion that the legislature in the state of Texas invested in our retired teachers. When I say invested, it really is a continuation of the promises that were made long before when I was wearing diapers. And so we were able to keep those promises. And I want to be clear, that was done on a bipartisan, bicameral basis. The Senate was with us this session on all of these issues. The leadership from the governor, lieutenant governor, our new speaker, everybody was singing out off the same sheet of music. And so that was very healthy and very constructive in terms of us being able to do what we did this past session for our retired teachers. So that's a little bit of a synopsis on the retiree front. Now over on the active side, in terms of our active teachers, it's hard to just say it all, but probably the best thing that I was able to do, arguably since I've been in office, is cast a vote in favor of House Bill 3. It did so many things for our public schools and our teachers. The beauty of House Bill 3, and there's several parts of this that I really like, but people have asked me afterwards because it was probably, as far as the number of pages, it was about a 400-page bill, and it was a complete rewrite of our school funding formulas that are distributed across the state of Texas. And normally and historically, the state, and when I say the state, I'm pointing at the legislature, over the last 40 years, really the only few times that we've been able to do that has been because of a Supreme Court order that we go and rewrite it because it was deemed unconstitutional. That wasn't hanging over our heads. But we still knew, I knew, that our old system now, really, I would argue that it was morally not sound, in the sense that no one can ever explain to me, nor could I ever explain to anyone under our former system, why we had some school districts that received around $12,000 per student, and then you've got students like in Trinity and in Groveton and my hometown of Lufkin that are receiving around $5,100, $5,200 per child. I mean, that is a great inequity between the highest funded school districts and our poorest school districts in the state of Texas. And so when I earlier, a few minutes ago, I said the beauty of House Bill 3. What I love most about that from a student perspective and a school perspective is that basically it raises the bottom up. Those folks that were already up there at $10,000, $11,000, they didn't really get a bump. Nobody lost any money up here, but they didn't really see an increase. Where you saw the sizable influx of money in our new formula, it went into primarily rural school districts across the state of Texas that were already at the bottom. So we lifted up that bottom, and I'll give you a number. So. And I can't remember exactly what Trinity and Groveton have, but they're about the same as mine. We're around $5,100, $5,200 per child. Under our new formula, no child in Texas, no matter where you live, no matter what school district you go to, the starting point in our new formula is that child, that school district, but that child is worth $6,140.
Awesome.
And that's just the basic amount. And then on top of that, every school, then that's when you start seeing the formula kick in. And there's some adjustments, and I won't bore you with all those. But in essence, of the 36 whole or part of school districts that I represent in House District 57, the average gain was around $700 per school district. And really, in the case of Trinity County, all of the school districts were above the average, that number that I just gave you. So in Trinity County, I think that if you go talk to your superintendents and you talk to your school board members, everyone's very happy about the new money that was invested in our public education system. Now back to those active teachers. The number one thing that I hear about from our supers and our school board members and our teachers is we need a pay raise. We need a pay raise for two reasons, really. One is retention. We want in rural Texas to be able to retain our teachers. We don't have, some people say a blessing, some people might say a curse, but we're not in an urban or suburban area where there's just a multitude of young people or people that are out there that want to jump into the education profession. And so it's more importantly for us strategically to keep what we have. And so on the retention side of this, we were able to do a lot to retain and boost the morale of our active current teachers. The other thing it allowed our school districts to do is raise the minimum salary amount that every school district gets. That was a state law. We required that you have a base salary of this much money. Now, a lot of our school districts were already paying that or above for a starting teacher, but there were a number of those 36 that were below that. And so with that infusion of new money, they were required to increase their minimum starting salary. So from a retention aspect and now a recruitment aspect and bringing folks into the profession of education, I think House Bill 3 goes a long ways into helping make great strides, especially in East Texas. And so I'm really happy about what it was able to do there. I mentioned I was in Normandy earlier, and I had a good visit with the superintendent over there about some things that need to be tweaked. I will tell you, there are some things that need to be tweaked, but one of the things that I'm really excited about and that we don't know the answer to yet is there was a requirement in that bill. So I've talked a lot about the funding side of it. That's the fun part. The policy side is a little less, dare I say, sexy. It's a lot more of kind of getting in the weeds and dealing with the policy issue. But one of the things that I hear about, well, for coming from a school board as an elected official of a school board before that, the number one issue was the high stakes testing. Whether students, teachers, parents, grandparents, across the board, 100%, nobody likes the high stakes testing. And so there is a provision, a requirement, if you will, in House Bill 3 that TEA, which of course carries out our education and policy issues in the state of Texas, they have to conduct a study to determine the appropriateness of the questions and the content on our high stakes tests. The other thing that's part of that is that we are seriously looking at figuring out what test we have to keep in place to adhere to our federal laws. Okay? And you'll have to forgive me. I remember No Child Left Behind, but I forget what the new federal law, relatively new federal law is that we're all operating under. But there are requirements for testing in the federal law, and we can't obviously violate federal law. But my question, and a question a lot of legislators has, is what test are we administering currently that we don't have to? That we could look at reducing those tests or potentially eliminating them. And so that's going to be part of this study. There was a lot, during session, there was a very high-profile news story that broke that you may recall hearing about. And it basically, the findings from a group of superintendents from across the state, from small districts to large districts, from the San Antonios to the Lubbocks, was when they looked at the third grade reading And I will tell you the most important test that the state of Texas looks at for our children today is third grade reading. And I don't have to tell you why that is probably the most important in terms of determining how successful that kid is going to be in school. But third grade reading is really where the rubber hits the road. And in the last round of STAR testing, okay, so this would have been in 2018, what they uncovered was that some of the questions that were asked of these third graders were questions that weren't both, I'm going to say, age and content appropriate, meaning that they were questions that were supposed to be asked on the 4th and 5th grade reading test. Well, you can't, I was quoted in that story as, if you're going to have a measuring stick, you got to make sure it's accurately measuring what we're saying. And if we're saying that the group that puts together the questions, if we're saying we're testing third graders, we need to test third graders. We don't need to give them 5th grade tests and expect them to all make 100s. It's just not possible. And so we need to make sure, and that's one of the requirements in House Bill 3, this provision I'm alluding to, is that to the extent that we are performing our STAR test, and we will continue to perform STAR tests, that we're not doing what has been alleged, and that is saying, hey, third graders, take this, but we're really asking you a bunch of 4th and 5th grade questions, because they haven't even studied that content yet. So I'm really looking forward to the determination, the outcome of that study that TA is going to be doing. Okay, I've covered a lot real quick. Let me pause and let me take a few questions. You all are just, that was a lot. Yes?
Going back to what you were talking about, the third graders. When I was teaching at an inner city school, we had 87% of our children, over 650 students in the building, were on free and reduced lunch. So you know where our economy level was. One of the questions that my students were asked was, if you had a new bicycle, where would you keep your bicycle at night? And it was in the garage, in the front hallway, or on the front porch. My children all lived in federal housing. They didn't have a garage. They didn't know what a garage was. To begin with, they were never going to have a bicycle. And one of my students wrote in at the bottom, under my bed, because he was going to protect that bicycle.
Oh, how precious.
I mean, when we went to administration and said, this is not for our children. You're not testing my kids and their socioeconomic abilities or what they have because of what this test says. And the correct answer was in the garage.
Right.
But they don't have a garage.
They don't have a garage.
Right.
One of the classrooms, one of the teachers said, one of her students even asked, what is a garage? Had no idea. We were looking at Hispanic, Vietnamese, Black American children. They had no idea what these things were. But they wouldn't listen to us as far as changing the test to fit what our kids were doing and what they were living with.
One of the suggestions that I have made, but there have been other, I won't take all the credit because there's been a lot of other, there's been several other members that have also recommended TA do this, is I think they need to, whatever the mechanism or the group is that they're using to develop the criteria, the content for our STAR test, I don't say they need to scrap it, but they need to modernize it. And essentially we need a group of primarily teachers. They're helping put together the test in terms of the content. Because who knows better what is being taught in a classroom
That's exactly
than the teachers.
That's exactly what we
And
did.
so, yes, we need to have some of the TEA, bureaucracy in the room as well. We ought to have some administrators in there as well. We ought to have some parents in there. But I believe that we can develop a better system. This is my personal belief. I believe that we can develop a better system because we're going to have tests, right? I mean, we all know that there's got to be accountability as far as there's got to be testing. I mean, we all took tests. But we need to make sure that the content of that test is appropriate for that class and that age group. And I think that's just common sense, personally. Sometimes I get lost, in government, but, I think that would be a big step in the right direction. And the other thing, hitting back to the high stakes part of that is, y'all may remember me talking about this or reading about this in my column that I write during session, but I've carried a bill now for 2 sessions. A version of this was signed into law by Governor Abbott this session. It was what I would call half a loaf. Essentially, is we looked at what some tests are that we could eliminate, and one of the tests, and this wasn't my idea because other states have gone this route, is when it comes to the U.S. history, and I'm just using it as an example, U.S. history. When you look at the content of the questions that are asked on the STAR test, it would probably grate on you a little bit because a lot of those questions, I would argue, may not be what you or I would call truly historical in the sense of being founding type memorable moments in our United States history. Essentially, politics has somewhat creeped into this. And so what my bill said is that let's take that 100-question test that we give every citizen or every person that wants to be an American citizen. We require them to pass this test. And it truly is based on our foundational documents, those critical moments in our American history, our different wars, looking at our figures, in our historical figures that make our country great. Those are the type of questions that are asked and that people that want to become Americans are required to know. And whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Black, White, Green, Asian, Hispanic, everyone seems to agree that that one test is representative of the United States history and that really should be the test that is administered, maybe more so than this test that someone would argue is more political. And so, you know, I had a lot of traction with it, but I never could quite get it out of the Senate. Well, this past session we were able to compromise, and essentially the outcome was that 10 of the questions on the STAR test that is administered for U.S. history, that they have to be pulled off of the national test. And the other thing is about the beauty of my bill, again, you know, is that you could take it online at school, but online. You could take it multiple times. You could take it any time between your freshman and when you graduate as a senior. You're not required to take it your junior year. And so there would be multiple opportunities for these students to be administered the test. It wouldn't be high stakes because if they didn't pass it, they could come back and take it again as many times as they want. And truly, they would be learning the foundational history that I think we could all agree on are the principles that make our country great. And so that's an example of one of the tests that is administered under the STAR umbrella that I think could be changed, that would be more representative of really what I think the constituents in the state of Texas want, because that's what I hear. But point is well taken. Who else?
Well,
Yes.
years ago, and I do mean years ago, when we started the teams test, it was tabs I think first, but it was when it was teams that I was involved so much. We had people, teachers, from, if we were working on a test for grade 3, there were teachers in that area from all parts of the state, representatives, to look at the questions. We went question by question to see if there was any bias or anything that was confusing or anything that would be germane to our kids. And, you know, they don't do that anymore.
Well, they don't do it the way they used to.
Oh.
They have really gotten away largely from what I would consider what you're talking about, Ms. Wortman. That is the valuable teacher input that is given for the content of these tests.
Because like you say, nobody knows better than the teachers that are working with those kids in
That's
those
right.
different areas. And,
That's right.
and we're all different. And some of the things that we say and do here, the people in West Texas or far North Texas wouldn't have a clue.
Right. That's exactly right.
And we, vice versa, we wouldn't either. And we looked at that and studied it, because I spent several days in Austin working on that. And so I know how it was done then, and it was fair.
Well, one of the issues that I call it mission creep. Of course, the tests are run, administered by the Texas Education Agency, which is accountable to the legislature, but largely they operate, they're an autonomous state agency. And they're the ones that are tasked with this. And so over the years, with different commissioners that have come in that have been appointed by the different governors we've had, that's been a while ago, but even since I've been there, the average tenure of a TA commissioner is, somewhere probably 2.5, maybe 3 years. And so when you're having that kind of turnover at the top level, and the next lady or gentleman want to bring in their own agenda, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but they have their own priorities, they look at tweaking some of this. And so over the years, based on the outcry that I've heard from all of these different constituencies that are represented by that child sitting in that classroom, I will tell you, I think we've gotten away from maybe the days when there was a lot more direct teacher input. And I think we need to get back to that because otherwise, essentially what we've created is a system where it's unfair for our children. And the other thing that I think that is important to acknowledge, and I'm not saying there needs to be a different system, but you brought up being an inner city. Well, one of the things that you find out about in the legislature when it comes to public education is that typically the two groups that are kind of standing side by side on a lot of the public policy issues that relates to education are the inner city representatives and our rural representatives. Because in many cases, we represent socioeconomically the most disadvantaged children in the state of Texas. And so there's a lot of similarities that kind of draw that alliance together. And it's a fact, it costs more to educate children of poverty. It's just a fact. It's been stated over and over again. And so, it's easy, maybe when you're sitting in suburban parts of the state with access to a lot of affluence and kids that, come from families with two parents and that are highly educated, they're just taught that at a young age. You're going to do this. But a lot of children in rural parts of the state, one parent, maybe two parents that don't speak English, parents, that are struggling. And so there's not that same type of parental involvement in that child's life. And so it falls on our teachers, largely, both to sometimes be a parent and to educate them. And looking at the cost, again, of educating children on the lower socioeconomic scale, I just think that TEA and the legislature, to some degree, need to be cognizant of the fact, and this kind of goes back to the formula of House Bill 3, that it does cost more to educate children of poverty. And so we've got to be cognizant of that as we start moving forward with looking at changing our tests as well.
One of the things they need to realize is that there are not enough hours in the day for an elementary teacher to bring our low socioeconomic children up to the point to where they can be ready to not only learn but to retain what we're teaching, that the other children that come from a different background are able to do in a day's time.
One of the things that, Carolyn, I'll come to you, but I just want to mention this, one of the things that, again, there's so much in House Bill 3, but one of the things for the first time the state has now offered certain school districts, you have to qualify, is, are y'all familiar with what they call the summer slide? Essentially, you're in school for approximately, you're in school for 9 months and you go, you're in summer break, vacation for 3 months. And so a lot of children do forget. And that's been referred to as a summer slide. And so to help combat that, now school districts for the first time, and this is optional, okay, if they want to pursue this, but now they can look at carrying school a little bit further into the summer if they want to, and there will be state resources to assist them to help these children to avoid the summer slide. Now, I don't know how many of our school districts in this part of the world will do that, but there are some school districts that are really excited about it, and we'll just have to kind of wait to see what our school districts around here decide to do. But it is going to be an option for our school districts should they move in that direction. I wanted to come right over here first.
Well, I was just going to say, and this will show my age, it even predates what Janet said, but when this system was first started, it was called the AEIS, the Academic Indicator Excellence System, right after House Bill, right after the No Child, the one you tried to quote. And there was a group of us from across the state that were appointed by, I believe, by the legislature, but I don't remember whether it's TEA or legislature, and we worked for 2 solid years. And we represented large, small, poor, West Texas, the border, and everything that was going to be put into that system for accountability was looked at through this kind of a prism and looked at with teacher input. And I'm thinking that was lost. Like you said, everybody kept adding to it, and it just, that was the beginning of tabs. That was a long time ago. That maybe you need to, in your bills, mandate, if you will, that there is that kind of total looking from lower level people, from the people in the districts, whether it's parents or children or teachers, from all parts of the state. And it was done then, and we worked hard. I mean, we worked for 2 solid years on the beginning of that accountability system.
Totally agree.
And it's gotten lost. I mean, when I see what's happened to it, it's a shame, because that was not the idea at all when it was started. It just wasn't.
Forecasting January 2021. I do think now that we've kind of got the school funding issue off the table, which was huge, I think there's going to be a laser focus in terms of education. I think we're going to be laser focused on this issue right here of the testing in our school system. And I think there will be I'm going to call it a comprehensive reform bill. And the reason why I'm even saying that is because we've had a bill come through every session, or at least the last 3. I can't remember my freshman session if we had one. We've had a really good bill come through that has passed the House the last 3 sessions that did eliminate some of those tests that were just state administered, but that has always died in the Senate. But my sense is, based on the outcry that I hear and based on what I saw this past session, when our retirees and our active teachers got engaged after the prior session, it moved the needle. I mean, I'm not going to call out names, but there were people that were, clamoring for all of this that had never really talked a lot about public education back at least in Austin. And so, as I kind of think ahead, it's going to be important for our active and retireds, as well as the entire education community, and that starts with the parents. I mean, if y'all collectively will stay as engaged as you were for this past session, I have no doubt we're going to see a lot more good things come out of this next session for all the different constituencies that I've talked about. So just file that away.
I've been in and out of schools 3 or 4 times a week for the last 2 years, and I've been many of the school board meetings. And the consensus that I get between STAR and the curriculum is there's gaps, and that the real complication of passing STAR is covering the gaps that isn't in the approved curriculum. And how do you suggest taking care of that?
Well, I think it goes back to what essentially we've been talking about, is I think we as a state are going to have a better understanding of what is on that STAR test. I mean, we need to know what the content is going to be. And we know historically, and I don't see a reason to change this, but historically when you look at the test questions, there's always some of the questions that don't count because they are test questions, test questions on the test that are looking at being used on a future test. So there's always going to be some content or questions that may not directly fit the curriculum that's being taught, but they're really being looked at for a future test. And I think that probably was confusing the way I said that, and I apologize. But it didn't make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
And so every test, there's going to be those questions on there that don't count. We just need to make sure that those questions truly aren't counted. And as if not more importantly, the questions that are counting, again, it goes back to the example that was cited earlier. You cannot hold children accountable for 3rd grade reading and say that they're passing or failing if you're giving them 4th and 5th grade content questions. It's just, I mean, no one supports that. And after it was highlighted, of course, no one wants to take responsibility that even occurred because it's indefensible, right? I mean, here we are saying, this is gonna be our measuring stick. If you can't do this, teachers and kids, then you can't graduate, or you're failing. And then we find out that the questions essentially, there's no way that some of these kids can get them right because they're way above their age group. So anyway, I will get on a soapbox on this because I was really hot about it, I'll be honest, during session when I found out about it. Somebody else had a question.
Well, I have a pet peeve, and no, people may not agree with me, but are we ever going to get to a mastery level where it's the top mastery level? Because every few years they raise the mastery level. And it's getting to the point, to me, to where our average students don't have an opportunity to pass it.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I will tell you, as a parent of a freshman in high school and as a freshman and a senior in high school, and having been involved in their education, throughout their education career, it is amazing to me when I reflect back on what I had to learn as a school student versus what my kids are having to learn. They're learning faster, they have to learn faster, and they have to learn so much more content than probably what any of us in this room ever had to do. And so, I don't know how to answer that question other than to say that we're pushing these kids very hard. That is, again, being driven by an ultimate test that they know, everybody knows is going to be administered. But it's hard to imagine us pushing these kids a lot harder. I mean, it's amazing when they're coming home, in first grade, throughout their entire school career, every night, and all they have time to do is homework. And, and I think it's important, now this is from just my personal belief, but you can have the smartest kid in the world, but you got to have that balance in that kid's life to where they also are doing something besides just looking at a book. They've got to learn how to relate with people, how to talk to people. They need to be engaged in extracurricular activities, whether that's sports or anything else. I'm a big fan of FFA and Ag in high school, especially in rural East Texas, because I know a lot of these kids, they don't want to go to college. They want to get out and have a career, and it's something using their hands. And that's something that we can start applying and allowing them to work towards in middle school, in high school. And so we got to make sure that we as a state, both as a legislature and in TEA, aren't crowding out those other important opportunities that those kids need to have access to, such as sports and FFA and all those organizations. And I feel pretty strongly about that. But you got to find that balance.
Right. Well, and I'm worried about kids' emotional health because our suicide rates have gone up. We've got so much pressure that's put on our kids in this day and age until they don't have time to be kids.
Right.
And they feel like they can never succeed.
I know. I share that concern as well. You talk about they don't have time to be kids. It's amazing, what our younger children are exposed to. And, I sound a little bit like our lieutenant governor when I talk about this, but, if y'all have seen some of these games that these kids play today, their war games and stuff, I mean, it's realistic. I mean, it's virtual reality. And I do think, especially with youth that are troubled, that maybe have some mental disorders, that is could be part, I don't want to say it is the problem, it could be part of the problem that is driving them towards more aggression and physical violence. I think that could be part of it. So, yes.
I think that the key word to all of this is balance. And a whole lot of it falls on the younger generation of parents who do not set the moral standards and responsibility standards for their kids. And they don't they set unreasonable expectations in some areas, like becoming an NFL football player being more important than being a good student and being a good all-around person. And so you can't cure that with legislation.
Can't.
And
Wish I could.
as I was growing up, I had teachers that filled in that gap because they had time to fill, they spent time with the students and they had time to fill in the gap. And we didn't have social media, and we didn't have all the sports and things to be part of, but we did have things within the school that we could be well-rounded. I mean, I warmed a lot of benches on the basketball team and played volleyball, and then still managed to work a job in high school and to keep up with grades. But now there just are so many things. I was trying to schedule some classes for a 4-H program. And, well, everybody had something on Monday, something on Tuesday, go to church on Wednesday if they happened to go to church, and then junior high football on Thursday and high school football on Friday. Well, finally we got past the junior high football, and so that Thursday is the only day that we could have it. And so I found that these kids, and then some of them couldn't do it because they had picture memory and UIL, and they, you know, so and so and so and so. And so I think that balance is a really good thing. And I think another thing that someone mentioned, and going to the national level, the only one that was appointed nationally to the President's Cabinet that I disagreed with was Betsy DeVos, because she is from a rural, from an urban area. She has no idea what happens in rural schools in Texas. And school choice can kill rural schools. We don't happen to be so unfortunate as to be near a lot of private schools that would be available to us without having to drive. But I think I think we need to have educators, not politicians, at the state level and at the national level.
I think I heard several amens under their breath when you said that. Yeah. Point, well taken. Well taken. Yes?
Are there any grants available for on-job training? There's a couple of companies that said they would love to have high school kids come in, but they can't afford to carry it all by themselves.
So, that is a great question. And so let me answer by saying this. So, a lot of times when it comes to what I'm going to call a workforce training grant, they are out there. And those are administered, funds are appropriated both by the federal and the state government. They flow through our Texas Workforce Commission. And we have 3 commissioners, one that's going to actually be in the area over at the Texas Forest Country Partnership tomorrow. I'll see him, Aaron Demerson. They are in charge with administering these job training grants. Now, most of the time, and it could be all the time, but I don't want to say all the time because I'm not clear on that. But a lot of times when I see those training grant dollars flow, they flow through your local community to your local community college, which is obviously the place a lot of folks will go for those job training skills. So, short way of saying, in this case, I would check with Angelina College if you know of an employer that would like to access some job training funds for future employees, or current employees for that matter, to contact Angelina College if they're located here in Trinity County. Now if they're in Walker County, that's going to be, what's the community college that covers Walker County?
Probably Lone Star.
Lone Star.
I think it is Lone Star, you're right, Lone Star. So if it's in Walker County, it'd be Lone Star. If it's in Trinity County, it would be Angelina College. And talk to them, because I can tell you, working very closely with Dr. Simon, the president of Angelina College, they are looking for employers out there that want to partner with the college. Because the great thing about community colleges, one of the great things, unlike say a traditional 4-year, is they're very mobile. and they can change their curriculum in a heartbeat, in terms of a semester, and bring in those courses that an employer needs to train, specifically train those employees. They do it all the time. If you think about all, a little closer to my house, but with all the layoffs we saw from the foundry, the paper mill, Lufkin Industries, those people, a lot of them ended up at Angelina College taking job training classes that were paid for through grants, and then they end up finding a job either with that employer they had partnered with, or they went and started a new career. So, did I answer your question?
Now, does this mean that to get the training, they have to go to the college, or can it be in-house training?
So to make it easy for whoever it is you're talking about and anybody else y'all may be thinking of, probably the best place to go is to contact Angelina College, again, if it's in Trinity County, and just ask them, or tell them the situation. Hey, we have a group of people that would like some job training skills. What can you offer us in this area? And is there assistance from the state level that can flow in terms of a grant to pay for that education, or at least help offset the cost of the education?
Yeah, because our tech ed group has got a 4-year program, electrical, plumbing, I can't remember the carpentry and something else. But anyway, welding, that's right, thank you. But there's like Trinity Steel said they would love to have high school kids come in and give them on the job training there, so they can develop skills with the machinery and that kind of thing on it. But if that's the case, that they have to go to the college to get it, then that's a long drive. And
yeah, well, a lot of times the great thing about technology today is Angelina College partners with most of our school districts in their, I think they have 12 county service region. And so, and I apologize, I don't know, but they may already be partnering with Trinity High School, for example.
They do with Groveton.
They do with Groveton. And so essentially, those students, they wouldn't have to travel anywhere.
okay.
They would basically, what I'm going to call pipe in, and I'm not a techie, I'd have my senior explain this to you, but essentially, it's not yes, it's a satellite, yes. And so the professor is sitting there in the classroom at the high school, and he's teaching that group of kids, and they're getting A, the content, and B, they're getting college credit for it at the same time, called dual enrollment.
The Groveton cosmetology class, they go in, they take the class, and they get certified for thousands of dollars less. When they graduate, they go out ready.
That's right, and that is exactly what we need to be encouraging and doing more of in the state of Texas, because that is really going to benefit rural Texas largely.
And that's what a lot of the administrators have been trying to cut out, though.
A lot of them have, but Groveton is one of the very few schools that had the forethought to write into their budget when they were cutting out the vocational courses in all of the schools around, and they kept their auto mechanics class, they kept their building trades class, they kept their cosmetology class. And one of them has been downsized some, but then they enlarged their ag class to include welding. And you mentioned the foundry. I have a relative that was laid off when the foundry closed, and he went to the workforce program and got his welding certification. And now he has a millwright job somewhere else, and so that worked. But that we need more of those classes available to rural schools so that students can succeed, because plumbers and welders make more money probably than teachers do.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of kids in our area that are doing this now in terms of taking these college courses in their respective high school.
Yes.
And again, the beauty of that is they graduate in many cases with a certificate ready to go to work day one.
Right.
And those kids, like my son, my oldest son that's a senior, he's going to go to a 4-year. But yet he's already accumulated so many hours on kind of the basic English and math courses that you would take as a freshman in college. at a fraction of the cost
Right.
that he would have to pay at a traditional 4-year, Sam Houston type university. So the cost savings for parents or those kids, if they're having to pay for their own college, is tremendous. And so I think this, it's more than a concept because it's pretty, I mean, it's out there now, but I think this is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. The key, though, is the state of Texas needs to make sure that we're not putting up boundaries. And Charles, to your comment earlier, this is a two-way street. So you got the state involvement through the community colleges, okay? But then you've got the local high school or the school district participation. We don't control that at state level. So there is a local control component here, and it's up to every school board and school administration to decide, what they want to do. But that's not something, to be clear, that's not something that we can control at the state level.
Well, what I was gonna say, my grandson took, he graduated 2 years ago, but he took the classes at the high school here in Trinity from Angelina. He wanted to be a diesel mechanic, but he started out just taking basic courses because he didn't know whether he was going to 4-year college or whatnot. So he had a lot of hours. But he met a man that was over Contractor Supply, and he liked him and whatnot, and they offered him I don't know what you'd call it, a scholarship, suppose. They paid for his college and gave him a job at doing his, the diesel mechanics while he was in college. So he would go to class, and then the afternoon he would be in the garage. And he has to give them 2 years, work for them for 2 years, which he's got 1 year already done, to pay them back for his tuition. But was fantastic for him.
Absolutely.
And for us.
Well, that's a win-win, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's what we like to see. But, folks, I just tell you, people talk about jobs, and a big part of, of course, government doesn't create jobs, but we can control the red tape that some of our employers have to go through to start a business. And so we do have a little bit of control in that part. But one of the things that we're always looking at is how we can go about creating more jobs. And folks, there are a lot of jobs in East Texas. I have employers tell me all the time, I wish we had more young people that wanted to work, but they got to pass the drug test, right? Kids have to pass the drug test. I hear this a lot from employers. Send us people that can pass the drug test. And the other thing, for a few years it was a lot on welding, and there's still a lot going on out there in the welding, in terms of welding needs. But I tell you right now, I hear from a lot of people that whether it's our school districts, but these companies, oil and gas, transportation, you cannot find CDL drivers. I mean, I tell young people, look, if you want to make a good living and you want to drive a truck, you can make a good living driving a truck. You just got to go get your education and get your CDL, because the sky's the limit right now. You can't drive anywhere in East Texas and not pass a yard that says CDL drivers wanted. You go talk to Trinity or Groveton School District. It's almost impossible to find people with a CDL. And so that's just an example. But there are a lot of jobs out there for people that want to work. And we just got to encourage people to work. So, okay, I see people looking at their watches. I think I went beyond my time. I'm sorry I was late, but thank y'all for having me today. It's a pleasure to represent you. And y'all know how to get a hold of me if I can ever do anything to help you. So thank you.
So we say thank you again for the check.
Yes, you're welcome.